Welcome to Sports, Clicks, and Politics with your hosts, Ben Hussong and me, Shawn Hannon. Welcome to episode 48 of Sports, Clicks, and Politics. I thank you all for joining us again here on another beautiful Monday here in upstate New York. Mr. Hussong, thank you for joining us.
Of course. I love the way you always say the episode is a question, whatever number it is.
Because I don't really know. I'm looking at it. I'm like, wait, what number are we on? 48.
Episode 42?
48. Closing on number 50. We don't have anything special lined up for 50. Maybe I should do that.
Yeah, I think you should do that.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I'll do something.
All right.
All right. Well,
I think you should buy me a gift. That's the good way to celebrate a 50th show.
Is that the paper gift?
Yeah, obviously.
Okay.
But it's also one-sided.
Yeah. Before we get started, be sure to like, share, subscribe to our channel, and click that notification bell, and you'll be updated when we post new content like we are right now, as we do every Monday here at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We got quite a good show here, Mr. Hussong. We had an interview a couple days ago with Megan Mansell, the a.k.a. Mamasaurus Meg on Twitter.
Yep.
She's a personal protection equipment expert, and we broke down all things masks and got into the nitty-gritty there. So that'll be at the end of the show.
Even got some of it into plain English.
Yeah. I mean, it was good. I said it.
It was a great interview.
There was a lot of information there. So
I agree.
The CDC made the news a little bit. We're going to touch on them. They kind of cooperated with the teachers union to decide, to draft their reopening guidelines for schools. We're going to touch on that. Also, they took a blow in court where a federal judge basically removed their authority to keep eviction moratorium in place. Basically, so now these somehow the CDC decided that they had jurisdiction over whether or not a landlord could charge a tenant rent.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So we're going to cover that a little bit. I want to touch base on, there's a couple fee articles, the Foundation for Economic
Enterprise?
Yeah, maybe I have to look that up. But anyway, I got two of their articles pulled up here, so I want to touch on base of those. One of them talks about how basically lockdowns were the exact wrong move. So we'll talk about that. I think we've touched on that a little bit ourselves already.
Yeah.
But we're gonna do more of that, and then right before the interview, I want to talk about segregation alive and well here in New York State. Vaccinated and unvaccinated folks. We're gonna have our own sections. We're gonna have our own rules. We're gonna get heckled from the vaccinated folks to the unvaccinated folks, and look down on scorn. Look at us.
I can handle it.
Yeah. So that's from our governor has basically said stadiums. We'll get into more of this too, but basically can. Cater to two different classes of people here in our arenas, so the vaccinated and unvaccinated. But I want to talk, start. Let's do sports and crypto, since they seem to be merging into each other
more and more
every day here. The New York Giants signed a first ever sponsorship deal with Greyscale, which is the largest crypto asset manager in the planet, I think, or at least in the country. Greyscale, something like $46 billion in crypto. So they have joined forces with the New York Giants. Now, this is on the heels of the Russell Okung, Pay Me in Bitcoin. We talked about a couple players, Trevor Lawrence from the NFL draft and Kansas City tight end Shawn all being asked to take at least part of their pay in cryptocurrency. This is kind of just the next chapter in that. We talked about the Miami Heat also have their arena is got a naming rights deal with a crypto company. And so now Greyscale enters the market, one of the biggies. Headquarters in New York City. They partner with the Giants. Is the crypto sports marriage just beginning here? It's just beginning here, but is it something that is going to kind of like just take root and take over in all sports?
So is the question, is it a flash in the pan, or is it here to stay?
Yeah.
All right. I think it's here to stay. I do. I think that there's a marriage that makes a lot of sense. There's a ton of money in crypto right now, and every sports league is looking for organizations, entities, and industries with a ton of money. Also, the target market for both of these two entities is very similar, because cryptocurrency is overwhelmingly most popular with the male 18 to 44 demographic, which is the same demographic you're targeting for most sports. I think the only exception to that might be baseball, and that's only because they can't get the 18 to 44 to tune in. So I think it makes a ton of sense, and I think that if that's what you want to get into, it's it's a great opportunity to advertise, to market, to promote the team with very little downside. Because even the people that are opposed to cryptocurrency aren't upset if a sports league has a cryptocurrency sponsor. Nobody cares. Yeah. They got money. Good. Use them.
Yeah, and this should, the way the statement was worded by the Giants made it seem like this was going to allow them to be able to start paying players in cryptocurrency, and this was going to help facilitate that. So, again, just another obstacle, kind of like that was some of the, I feel like the nuance at where Russell Okung kind of was so groundbreaking was that he figured out how to get the payment, right? So he basically put all the pieces in place, and now other people are putting the pieces in place ahead of time, preparing for people like Russell Okung, and obviously the Giants are going to be in a primo position, basically having a gigantic asset manager being able to pick their brains as they move into a crypto payment for their athletes. But
also a big competitive advantage, because same thing of if you are inclined and you want to be paid in crypto and the Giants will but the Cowboys won't, that's going to give them a leg up.
Sure.
If you're not inclined to be paid in crypto, the Giants will and the Cowboys will. So, again, it's all upside, not a lot of risk, not a lot of downside. It's well worth doing.
Yeah, I think that this is, I think more and more teams, and I'm sure that they're already doing this, figuring out how to have some kind of crypto, payment for their contracts and whatnot. So, again, just kind of like a more of a crypto's going nowhere. The price movement is what it is, and things are going to go up and things are going to go down. But I think the industry or the phenomena, whatever you want to call cryptocurrency, as you point out, is not a flash in the pan. I think it's here to stay as long as we have electricity.
Right up until that solar flare. Then you're going to want to empty those wallets, folks.
Yeah, and then speaking of crypto, we had a kind of a pop culture meets crypto up on Saturday Night Live here this week. I don't know if you saw your boy Elon Musk.
Obviously, I did not.
You didn't stay up? You didn't stay up?
Oh,
Saturday?
I was up. I just wasn't watching TV.
So Elon Musk, meme lord himself, all things Doge, all things crypto, space, electric cars guy. Not too many business executives end up on Saturday Night Live, I don't feel like.
Not a ton.
Not that he's all that funny. He's funny on Twitter, I guess, a little bit. He's a troll, I guess, so he's funny that way because he's the richest guy on the planet and he's trolling people, which is funny. But it never struck me as like one with comedic timing and somebody who I was like, oh, this is going to be a hit. And I didn't watch it either. And it turned out that it was, from the feedback that I was seeing, it wasn't all that funny. I'm sure it was just a novelty of having him on.
So he is funny, but he's accidentally funny. It's funny because his mind works so much differently than yours or mine. And it's so that you can ridicule him, you can laugh at him, or you can, maybe envy him or whatever you want. But it's not necessarily better or worse. It's a trade-off because he is, in essence, from what I can gather, a sociopath. But he's a sociopath with really good intentions for humanity. But he doesn't have that same I guess, basic understanding of human emotion and connection that most of us do. So I remember reading his biography, and the author was asking about how you can do all he does and still maintain a marriage or a relationship. And he's like, I'm sure there's a way to do it. I just don't know what it is yet. I just haven't figured it out. Well, what are the hours a week that a woman would require in a relationship in order to be happy? Like, what would be the number? And she kind of got silent. He's like, no, really, what would be the number? Like, in his mind, you can ask that question of a woman, and the answer should be 8. Okay, I can fit that in. Like, he wasn't kidding, but it was funny. Like, oh my God, like this dude just works this way. And now he literally, you could say what you want about how he's a bad guy or whatever else, but he open sourced all of his patents for electric vehicle batteries so that every other company could use them. Like, he literally just wants to get electric vehicles because he's overly concerned about climate change and thinks this is the answer. He won't take SpaceX publicly because it'll be so much money that they will get away from their core mission, which is to make human beings a multi-planetary species. It's the only reason SpaceX is not a public company. It's because it is so profitable. They make so much money firing satellites into space that he's afraid if they go public, then with shareholders, they will get away from their core mission. So he's like a sociopath with really good intentions, with really good plans, but he doesn't have that basic human emotion thing. So it's funny.
And I think most people were watching in anticipation of what was going to happen with Bitcoin and Dogecoin. And Bitcoin went down a little bit, but Dogecoin tanked about from 75. I think it went from 75 cents was the highest point. I think it was 71 cents, maybe just before the show started, and dropped all the way down to like 38 cents, almost in an hour.
So,
basically,
are you buying the dip?
People did buy the dip. It's up to 51 cents ish now here. I don't know. Let's check Doge live here. Let's flip.
Is it going to be above your head?
It's going to be above my head.
All right,
Ben. Look, 50 cents, 50.45 cents. So rebounded a little bit. You know, somebody bought the dip.
Rebounded a little bit. 38 cents to 50 cents is a roughly 30% return in the span of 2 days. Like, this is how discombobulated we are from reality on rate of return right now. If you got 30% in 2 days and you're like, not bad.
Really, it was like an hour.
All right, well, I take
it was just a dip, Ben.
That's just nonsense.
Bouncing. So
why would you even wake me for this? God.
Yeah. Well, like I said, most of these dips I sleep through. So they happen instantaneously. This was just one. I thought it was interesting because, you know, there were people talking about, oh, this is going to be David Spade tweeted out something like to the effect of this is going to be a 90-minute infomercial for Dogecoin, and I'm buying some. But it turned out to be the exact opposite. People had basically pumped the price up in anticipation of his appearance and sold the news, as most effective traders seem to do. So
outstanding.
Yeah. But anyway, that's interesting. Let's bring crypto back to New York State, Ben.
Yeah, what's happening here?
So there's this company who I would say recently, maybe within the last few weeks, become familiar with because I was reading about some articles. Greenridge. It's a company that basically turned an old coal power plant in Dresden, New York, which I think is near Seneca Lake someplace, wherever Dresden is.
Sure.
Took a coal power plant, and retrofitted it to natural gas, and then basically started mining Bitcoin out of this power plant. And so there's some lawmakers, some do-gooders here in New York State, both in the state Senate and in the state assembly. There is a bill proposed to put a moratorium on any new mining plants, if you will, or retrofitted these mining operations in New York State until there is a environmental impact study done on the outcome of retrofitting these power plants.
Now, time out. This company bought and paid for that study already.
So they opened 4 years ago, I believe, but it was determined that they did not need an economic impact study at that time, that there was no reason for it, that they were not going to make an impact. They have increased their capacity, their mining capacity here, and they're using more and more energy as they do. I don't know that it still matters, but this is basically where we're at now. So we have bills on the state assembly and in the state Senate, both basically looking to put a moratorium on Bitcoin mining. There's something like 30 existing shut down power plants in New York State that all could serve as potential replicas of this Greenridge power plant. And so the lawmakers, the good-didders, are trying to make sure that all this is going to be energy efficient, I guess, before we jump into the mining. So I guess this is just, there's some mining operations going on, like the old Alcoa factory up in Messina, I think is
love that place.
Is rocking and rolling, one of the bigger ones in the country, if not the world, up there. And these replicas, like this Greenridge Generations operation, looks like New York State is just going to run them out of business, right? So it looks like they're going to run them out of this state and force them to some other state, because not everybody's going to basically, care as much as Rachel May does whether or not Bitcoin operations are emitting some kind of pollutant.
I mean, they are, but so is everything. Like, everything's a trade-off of we emit pollution. Like, we are what breathes out carbon dioxide. I don't know how to tell that to people.
Don't say it too loud.
I know, right?
They ban that shit.
I hope they never connect those dots. But I also, admittedly, this is wrong. This is not the right reaction. This is not the proper way for logical debate on public policy. But as soon as I see Rachel May's name on anything, I'm like, why should I listen to you about anything?
That's fair.
I mean, look, you are the most, I shouldn't say the most because there's a lot of competition for that, but you are a bought and paid for political hack who does nothing except what your marching orders are from those above you. You were the head of the Committee on Seniors and Aging who said, well, what's the point of investigating the nursing homes now? I don't know. It's your exact job. Call me crazy, but some of us like to do our job that people pay us for. So, all right, that aside, I know that's not a good rational argument, but it is my instinct. Immediately, whatever she says, I assume the opposite is true. I don't know. Look, you want to do an environmental study? Great. I think most people would be on board with environmental studies for most things. The problem is that by requiring environmental studies, everybody of us knows it's a corrupted process where people get charged way too much money and get overly leveraged and start charging businesses millions of dollars just to give them the capacity to start doing business, when in reality, they don't care if you are energy efficient or not. If you can spend enough money lobbying to them, they'll look the other way. And I think that's my fundamental issue with all of this is I think you're just all full of it.
Yeah, and it looks like the town board there approved the expansion, for what they needed to kind of, so if the local officials there seem to be in favor of this, yeah, New York State should be looking at them, but I'm not sure if this is, like I said, I'm gonna follow this only, but I just became aware of this Green Ridge power plant here a few weeks ago, and then I happened to see this bill get introduced, basically directly targeting that power plant. So I'll touch on this a little bit as we go forward and see how this unfolds. But I found it interesting that there's this potential for New York State with all these closed power plants, and actually, if you go back and do the dirty digging into the opening of the Green Ridge plant, it's not all that. It's kind of dirty as well with Cuomo and a bunch of other nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about. If you have enough.
It's in New York, so this is how freaking stuff gets done here. It's just pathetic. But
it's pay to play, and it's well known. It's all over the place, and we know it. I do think that why can't you let them run as you conduct the environmental study? I mean, truly, well, all right, they're already up and running, or they're close to it, and you're going to put a moratorium until we do it. Like, no, just let them run and then do your job. Your job is oversight, not prevention. You can't do prevention. You suck at everything you touch. So, yeah, you waste 2 years of time for these people, and then you come back and either say yay or nay based pretty much solely on how much money they've donated to your ego at a minimum. And now you get to come back and say, I did this to protect everybody. No, you didn't. You did this to flex your muscle, to show how powerful you are and how much we need you.
And they'll get a cut.
And oh, God, will they get a cut. Right. And all it's going to do is, listen, ask the land and had to get this stuff done. Ask them how much money it actually costs. At most, let's go with $1 million. I would say it's probably, for your average project, they're way more.
All right.
Where's the money going?
Yeah, right. All right, so let's turn our attention to the CDC. They got a couple things in the news this week. First, let's touch on that. Let's touch on them and the reopening of schools. So the American Federation for Teachers and the CDC and the Joe Biden White House basically were all in communication with each other leading up to which I think was February 12th, I think they said was the announcement for the school reopening plan. And it turns out that the CDC basically on multiple occasions took direct influence from the teachers union and to outline their guidelines for open. Ben, is there any conflict of interest with the scientific group of the CDC and the lobbying group for the teachers writing guidelines for reopening schools?
Of course.
And what would your concerns be with the teachers union guidance to the scientists?
Well, there's a conflict, and you're talking a conflict between the people and parents and teachers, and it's not even the teachers, the unions that for whatever reason don't. And they can make the arguments about, well, it's all about the safety, except there's so much data and science and evidence at this point that there is no argument to make. You're so full of crap that it's unbelievable that you would even say this out loud. And the fact that people still believe you is a shining indictment of the very education system that your organization is so proud of. So if you have the teachers and the unions, which are, look, unions are a beast like any other. Like, it's no different than government. It's no different than politicians. It is, you have your goals. Your goals are not the common good. Your goals are maximize the benefits for your organization. Okay, fine. So what's easier if you have an employee? Should I pay you and you have to come into school every single day and pay for all these expenses, or you make the same exact amount of money, do remote learning, and you only have to work literally 5 hours a day instead of 8? Same money. What's better? That is. Yeah. Also, you get to have this as leverage now with more negotiations of if you can convince people that, hey, it's not safe and we can't do it, and the school districts are now coming back and saying, like, look, I'm getting daily emails and phone calls from parents saying this is ridiculous. They're sending me studies. They're sending me this. We need you back in. Well, what do you have now? You have bargaining. So now the teachers union has an extra chip at the table if they can say, all right, we'll concede and send kids back to school if you give us this. So the CDC is what they are relying on as the objective arbiter of information. They're not. And I think this is reality. Like, they're not the objective arbiter of information. You're dealing directly with, I get the counterpoint of, well, the teachers know what's happening in the classroom and this, that, and the other. Like, okay, sure. I'm not going to argue that, but why would that really impact? Why would you let them write the law? Why would you let them write the guidance of you're supposed to be the scientists, they're supposed to be the teachers?
Right.
Not the other way around. And I am under no illusions that this is different than how almost every single law in this country gets passed.
Right. Yeah.
A lobbying group writes it and sends it to the representatives. Half the time, 95% of the time, they don't read it, and they put it in a law. And if you think that's wrong, I encourage you to go start researching some of the laws that have been written and who actually writes them.
Yeah, our whole lawmaking process is completely broken.
It's a joke. And so you have, that's my problem with it is, all right, so the CDC, the teachers are turning around and they're getting to have both sides of the argument because they get to come in and say, everybody needs to have masks on. The CDC recommended it. Well, the CDC recommended it because you wrote it into the guidance for them. That's wrong. Like, now you're going to come back and use that in a bargaining power position, and it affects all of us. I don't care if you have kids or not. Like, you pay the taxes. We all pay school taxes for where we live. Your money is going to fund this ridiculousness. And the studies and the science and the evidence, it couldn't be more clear that school reopening is the safest activity it could possibly be. And instead, all they keep doing is trying to spin new information like, well, the variants came out and they disproportionately affect children.
That was actually one of the things they they did successfully get into the law was basically outlining we could close down again if there was enough of a variant breakout that we could basically just rewrite all these rules all over again immediately. So
and you're like,
they have an out.
They're saying it already, and I'm looking at it and going, well, what's the effect on mortality? Well, but they're getting sicker. Okay, well, when 0 were getting sick and then 1 does, yes, that's a big jump. But when 0 were dying and now 0 are still dying and 0 are still transmitting to adults, which is what you're so genuinely claiming is the real issue, that they might pass it to somebody else, even though this has been studied and researched to death that they do not effectively spread this virus, and it's a 1 in a million chance of them actually spreading it to an adult, let alone somebody in a high-risk category, let alone asymptomatically. You're full of it. Like, you're not genuinely looking out for the best interests of your people. You're trying to get more money. And guess what? Now, if you're the union in charge of this and you're saying masks on everybody and I happen to work for a mask company, guess what I just might do with my tax-deductible donations next year? I like this union. Let me give you some money, man. Let's go over here. How about if I run a testing company? And then the money flows in. Don't worry, I'm sure it's all on the up and up, and none of it gets handed off under the table or in cash payments in envelopes or in cryptocurrency.
I saw a figure of $70 billion that was spent on testing alone.
It's amazing.
$70 billion.
Right, and this is the craziness of, if I had any faith that you were acting in good interest, I would be a little bit more on board. But you've shown that you're not. Like, if you're genuinely telling me kindergartners need to wear masks, indoor or out, you are either a complete ignoramus or you are malicious. There's not a third option. You either are, I guess the third option is you're not ignorant, you're just not a very smart person. So it's one of these three things. You're either dumb, you're ignorant of the science and the evidence, or you don't give a shit. Sorry for the language. You don't care. And that's what I have a problem with is you can't have it all these ways. So now the CDC comes out, and they're supposed to be this objective body, and we're supposed to trust the science and follow the science. And the teachers union comes out like, this is according to CDC recommendations. And then you find out they wrote the recommendations, and you're going, what?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a joke. This is like letting police unions write the rules on what is an acceptable level of trauma that you can do to somebody's brain. That's probably they are the most qualified to do that, but you'd be looking at it if you were the one that just got your butt kicked by the cop. You'd be like, wait, what do you mean they set the rules? That's not fair. Like, well, no, it is because they know the most. And this is, I don't mean to pick on unions. This is true of, same with corporations that have laws written, the corporate pharmaceutical lobbying groups. You know how much money pharmaceutical companies spend on lobbying Congress?
Everybody.
It's insane.
Yeah.
The best example I can give you is 2004. I don't remember the guy's name. Louisiana congressman came in and said, I got a bill that we're going to pass. It's going to protect Medicare rights. It's prescription drugs. And it was saying basically the government could not negotiate pharmaceutical prices for the drugs. And so this guy from Louisiana under President Bush got it signed, got passed into law. George Bush signs it into law. This guy gets out of Congress, goes to work for a lobbying organization for Big Pharma, making upteen millions of dollars per year. Now, is that bribery? I don't know. Is that illegal? No. Is it ethical? God, no. And everybody knows what's happening. Then the real fun part is this guy goes and lobbies so hard when Barack Obama gets into office and says, we're going to get the Affordable Care Act passed, and the pharmaceutical companies are on board. Want to know why they were on board? Because they extended that rule. That's why they were on board, because they extended that rule. Congress approved it. President Obama signed off on it. So when I tell you it's not a partisan issue, it's not a union versus corporation issue, it's none of that. They're all like this. This is how business is done in this country. Terrible. This is how laws are made. It's a joke.
And speaking of, I don't know, a joke, back more on the CDC. So this, did you know?
Oh, my God, I don't know anything. I want to hear this.
I'm going to read right from the Foundation of Economic Education.
Is that what it is?
Yes.
I thought enterprise was such a good word. Oh, well.
Right from, this is the Brad Palumbo who wrote this. I'm just going to read his first paragraph, and then it's a question. So, did you know that unelected bureaucrats at the Centers for Disease Control, otherwise known as the CDC, Ben, have the power to unilaterally commandeer rental properties nationwide?
No.
Well, they do. Well, they did. A federal judge has since struck that down, but the eviction moratorium, which is basically disallowing landlords to evict tenants, is coming from the authority of the CDC. Well, it was coming from the authority of the CDC. A federal judge has now struck that down, and excuse me, Judge Dabney L. Frederick, striking down the moratorium of the city's logic would mean that so long as the Secretary or the Department of Health and Human Services can make a determination that given a measure is necessary to combat the interstate or international spread of a disease, there is no limit to this reach, basically. So they're basically saying they could do anything they wanted if they just basically said they were doing it in the name of a pandemic, and which is what they were doing. And so now this has been overturned. So I'm not sure what this does going forward, but I feel like this is at least a step in the right direction for removing this nonsensical authority from the CDC, basically not allowing landlords to evict their tenants, because clearly that's been taken advantage of for over a year here now. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on landlords not being subjected to the CDC's reign anymore?
I mean, I think it's the most common sense answer of like, look, I don't want anybody kicked out of their house. I don't. But every time, you don't just get to make policies. Everything is a trade-off. You have to give something up to get something, even on public policy. So, all right, great. The landlord who owns this property and is giving it to the tenant for money, just an exchange on the free market, now is not allowed to collect money. Okay. Are you going to waive his taxes? Are you going to waive his insurance? Are you going to waive is he no longer responsible for repairs?
Is he paying property tax?
Right. Does he not have to do that anymore? Well, no, he's supposed to pay that. Like, well, how in the world is this on a public policy level? How is this a good idea? Well, the rich people can take it. Do you think that these people are all just rich? Like every person that owns rental properties is wealthy? They're not. You should meet more people. So I look at this and all I could think is this is the epitome of good intention, bad policy. Your good intention of we don't want people kicked out, especially not in the midst of a pandemic. Cool. Although I have to admit, I'm somewhat confused why you are having such a problem if you're on unemployment and collecting the additional $300 a week. These two things are simultaneously true, apparently. People aren't filling jobs because they're being paid more to stay home than they would make by working. People don't have enough money to pay rent, and we have to make sure that they can't be evicted. They can't both be true. They can't be. It seems that one of those is a given.
Well, I mean, the first one is true because they don't have a rent payment, right? So they have way more much money than they normally would have because their expenses are basically probably 50% less. So, right. And they're making more money because the federal government is giving them more money. So it's a recipe. It's a disaster, right?
Yeah, I don't want to argue the morals or the ethics with people because it's sort of a moot point of like, obviously we don't want people thrown out. I also don't want people to lose the house that they bought and fixed up for the purpose of renting it. Are there bad landlords out there? Yeah, there's slumlords and everything else. Are there bad tenants out there? Yes, they exist. I'm sorry, but there's bad people on both sides and good people on both sides, and the vast majority are just trying to get by. They're just trying to either own the house and collect a little rent money, or they're just trying to rent a property and live. They're not good. They're not bad. They're somewhere in between. So when the government steps in and says, well, I got this. Oh, my God. Now, of course this is going to go bad. And the more that they try to control it, the worse it gets every single time. And so they just keep throwing money at it. Now you've created this perfect storm of negative, of all negative outcomes of of course this isn't going to function. This can't work.
The market is completely distorted. It's
right.
it's so out of whack.
You can't have it. You're going for, like, we want to protect the 0.1% of the population that fell through the cracks by making the lives worse for 15% of the population. Like, okay, fine, I want to help the 0.12, but maybe there was a more tailored strategy. Maybe there was something we could have done.
Focused protection.
Right. Maybe there was something we could have done at a, God forbid, maybe a local level. Maybe it made federal funds available at a local level to set up and have some existing agency, like, that is in charge of housing already, if that existed, to go around and have an application that said, if you genuinely are in danger of losing your home, please tell us why and fill this out and send it to us. Now, the people that are just taking advantage aren't going to fill the form out. The people that genuinely need it are. So you're never going to eliminate all of the fraud, the waste, and the abuse, but at least you could minimize it by not allowing these overly broad things. It's the same reason the tax code is so jacked up on the high end, because you're making these rules available for some people, but you can never narrowly tailor it enough so everybody takes advantage of all these rules. That's how people end up paying so little in taxes, which I applaud. The rules are there. Everybody should pay their fair share, and they shouldn't pay one dime more than what the government requires their fair share to be. If you want to, you're allowed to give extra money to taxes. Otherwise, you shouldn't. So I guess that's the biggest thing is it's so unsurprising, and you and I were talking about this last year of this is going to end badly. There is no way for this to go well. You're asking people to take the brunt of this law as the property owner and to protect the tenants, which, okay, fine, but why are we not protecting the landlords as well?
Yeah, and I feel like for some reason the tenants technically might be due for the back rent, but there's zero chance it's ever happening.
No shot.
No shot.
No shot happening. No. These guys are just out, and then they'll come up with some relief bill to bail out all the homeowners, but only up to a certain asset and income level, and none of them will play any games with depreciation or anything else to get that in the air. And then the government just throws more money at a situation and makes it worse. We should do an entire series on how much money the government spends on problems that have gotten
There's not
worse.
Enough zeros, Ben.
I mean, listen,
the
war
war
on
zeros.
drugs, homelessness, corruption, like everything they try, they get more of when they're trying to eliminate it. It's the funniest thing in the world, and it's so depressing at the same time of how much worse we make things.
Speaking of making things worse, did you know that lockdowns don't work?
I did. As a matter of fact, I think we had this figured out like last June.
So I'm going to piggyback on our first Foundation for Economic Education article and go right back to a second Foundation for Economic Education article, this one by John Miltimore, talking about the effectiveness of lockdowns. And he's referring to a new study. This came out from, from the National Bureau of Economic Research, from University of Chicago economist Casey Mulligan. So I'll give a brief take of this paper. So the microevidence contradicts the public health ideal in which households would be places of solitary confinement and zero transmission, right? So the public officials thought, hey, let's put everybody at home. They'll be quarantined. They'll be confined there. They won't spread this. But instead, the evidence suggests that households show the highest transmission rate and that the household high-risk settings for the transmission of COVID-19. So basically, we sent everybody into the place where there was the highest transmission rate for a year, and we wonder why lockdowns didn't work.
Weird.
Shocking.
I know. It's almost like the overly broad strategies shouldn't be applied to the entirety of the United States of America or even to the entirety of the state of New York.
Yeah.
Almost like, I seem to remember somebody making a big point about this last year. There are a few geographical, cultural, and fundamental differences between the island of Manhattan and Syracuse, New York. It's almost like they're two very different places that may require slightly different strategies in dealing with the problem. I know that's wild. I know that's crazy to say out loud. But I just might be onto something here, that maybe the same thing that worked in New Zealand is there's some fundamental differences between New Zealand and the United States of America. I don't know, differences in population, in size, in culture, in trust in government. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, obviously we've covered the lockdown failures for every single show, I feel like. 48 straight shows.
People are still claiming that India should go into a lockdown now. And you sit there and you go, all right, when we were making this point last year of like the lockdowns did not work, they do not work, and they are a bad public policy because the economic cost is too high, and the economic cost does lead to loss of lives. Just because you can't see it as clearly doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It does. So you saw that, and last year the response was, nobody's talking about lockdowns. You're doing a straw man of like, well, yeah, right now they're not because the cases aren't up high and everything else, but you're telling me if cases spike up, you guys aren't going to start ringing that bell again? I don't believe you. I think you are. And sure enough, as soon as cases started to go up, like, we need lockdowns. The government needs to do more. Like, no, the government sucks at everything. I'm sorry. They have a terrible track record. You want to know the only thing they're really, really good at is killing people.
They lead the league.
I mean, there's nothing that they do better than killing people. And it's look at success rates.
Yeah. And like I said, his article by quoting Frederick Hayek, and I kind of agree with, I like his last little sentence here. Hayek's words should be displayed in every government office. And this is the quote. The more the state plans, the more difficult planning becomes for the individual, right? So the more times this government, we all suffer. We all make it. It's more difficult in our lives as the state decides to plan our lives. So I thought
the government that governs best governs least.
You got it.
And that's, I don't have any ill wishes. It's just at what point do you acknowledge thorough government to address these types of problems? There isn't one. Like, it's so different for what should the people of some small town or Cheyenne, Wyoming do versus what should the people in Miami, Florida do? That's probably different. There's different levels of vitamin D in each of these respective places. There's different cultures. There's different populations, population densities, traffic patterns, overall interaction, how many people you come in contact with. Like, this was obvious so long ago. And it was obvious, we were talking about this, like, well, it's not long enough and you don't know. Like, I mean, yeah, sure, but you're talking about having to have a reversal of all the available data that we have. You'd have to, it's not trending in that direction whatsoever. You're not talking about a slight thing and all of a sudden you could say it works. You're talking about a 180-degree turn. That doesn't happen in data. Not often. If it does, there's some precipitating event that causes it. We didn't have that. And so all these people still saying, like, no, they do work. They could work. Look at New Zealand. Look at, what was the other? Japan.
Yeah. No, like, every single example fell by the wayside.
Eventually collapsed.
Eventually enough time. That's right.
Right. And then it was, this should have been so obvious so long ago because the reality is not everybody can fully quarantine. Not everybody can stay in their house. That's not safe for people. Like, think about how many deaths we caused just because people were too afraid to go to the hospital because they were so afraid of COVID. Even if COVID wasn't a statistically relevant threat to them, they died of something else because they didn't want to get sick with something that had a 0.001% chance of killing them. And we think this was wise public policy?
No.
That's crazy.
All right. Speaking of wise public policy, I love these transitions, Ben. You're feeding me nice.
I got you.
Our governor, Andrew Cuomo,
he's not my governor.
I included myself in this one.
All right.
Has determined that he's going to lift the occupancy restrictions at stadiums as long as you're vaccinated. So there's going to be sections where they can sit shoulder to shoulder with masks, vaccinated outside at a stadium, but they can no occupancy caps at all. And then there's going to be other sections where the unvaccinated, the unclean, the segregated, they're going to sit in sections where they have to sit 6 feet apart for everybody, also with masks outside in a stadium.
How is outside masking still a thing?
Before we get into the mask part of the nonsense of both of these, so we're going to have two fan sections or sections where we're going to have the so-called clean vaccinated folks looking up over their shoulder at the unclean unvaccinated folks, basically looking on in disgust.
I got to tell you something. Kind of okay with it.
I mean, I don't mind. I don't want to sit shoulder to shoulder too many people.
I'm saying, like, even if I was vaccinated, I'd go sit up there to get the space and be like, hey, look at us. Oh my God, I can spread out, stretch, sit over here, whatever.
So
it's not the worst thing ever.
Aside from the personal benefit, what kind of, applications where this is not going to be so friendly to us?
Well, let's discuss just the, first off, complete lack of pragmatism in this. And, well, I are outside. If I am 6 feet away from the next human being, or if I am vaccinated, why do I have a mask on? Outside. Why? If you're 6 feet away, if that's the requirement, you are by definition not in a congregated area. What am I missing?
You're just removing the fact that governments don't try to use logic when they make laws and orders.
Well, like, how do you even explain this to somebody of like, well, the people that are vaccinated, and we're just going to assume that they can't spread the virus, even though we know that's not true. But that aside, they can't. I don't want to go down that road.
Listen, I don't care too much I think we're both in agreement that the 6 feet rule doesn't matter. The mask doesn't rule. I'm more focused on the
separate treatment.
The actual, stigmatization that would happen to the fans. Listen, I'm going to quote from your governor. Now, this is your governor speaking. He's not my governor today.
Fair enough.
So Cuomo assured fans the new vaccinated and unvaccinated seating sections would be separate but equal. It's not like you can get a nosebleed seat because you're unvaccinated. So basically he's saying, hey, you're going to be able to, get all the things that you want to get, kind of like the drinking fountains.
So just so I can be clear, and if you could see my hands on camera, that's great, but I'm going to say like section 101, full of vaccinated people all right next to each other. Section 102, full of unvaccinated people standing 6 feet apart.
I think maybe they have some sections.
Smartest idea.
I don't know.
Are they going to keep one section like completely empty?
I refuse to acknowledge it in first-hand sight to see what's happening.
I love every part of this plan because it's so well thought out. And here's where I was going to go with pragmatism and practicality, okay? We are pretty confident at some point boosters will be required from this vaccine.
Almost assuredly.
So if I get the first 2 shots but not the booster, can I go in?
Unless you can forge your vaccination card.
So do I, like, if the booster comes out, you're going to give me X amount of time so that I can enter the stadium?
Probably right at the stadium. Or probably they're doing that. It's
amazing.
Yeah, they're doing that at Yankees and Mets games. They're giving the shot, J&J shot, right in the parking lot.
It's amazing. So, like, this is my issue.
And you get a ticket.
This is my issue with all of this, though, is like, all right, fine, but you're not planning for the future. Like, you're going to just adjust this on the fly and be like, okay, well, let's get all these new variants issued. Well, not practical that we'll be able to get all those shots out. So for this week's game, it'll be okay if you don't have your booster. But next week's home game, you will not be allowed to sit in your vaccinated section with your mask on and under 6 feet unless you can prove you've had the variant booster.
And let's put this in the backdrop of we've seen the stadiums in Texas where they're just packed full, no vaccination required, no masks, like shoulder to shoulder, packed. Same thing. There was I don't think it was an MMA fight in Texas, and the 73,000 people, shoulder to shoulder, no vaccinated passport, no needed, no mask, no nothing. And yet here we are. We got outside sections with masks 6 feet apart.
Like, this is the stuff that really, it has to drive you a little bit crazy. And this is, again, let's go back to the public policy discussion of if the goal is actually just to prevent spread transmission and contain the virus. What about people that have antibodies? What about people that have pre-existing T-cell immunity? What about people that are under the age of 18? What about people that
That's irrelevant because they want you to get vaccinated regardless of all that.
This is what I don't understand.
It's all about the vaccination, right?
I get it. I just don't. Listen, it's a money grab. I hope that is the extent of what this rule is, but I just don't grasp it because there's so many flaws in this. I get why the politicians are doing it. I get why the pharmaceutical companies are on board with it. I get why the masking industry and lobbying groups and everybody else is in. I got it. I don't understand how the average human being walking around can listen to this and go, oh, thank God we got these people. And then turn to somebody else and be like, see, you idiot. You don't want to get vaccinated. Ha. Now you got to wear a mask and sit 6 feet apart. And I'm going to sit there and go, I'm good. 6 feet apart? Yeah, no, you're telling me I can't cramp in next to, like, Joe Canada spilling beer down my back during a game as he passes out? I'm cool. I'm good. Yeah. No, I'm happy. Give me 6 feet of space all around me. I'll pay extra to go to that game because then I can just be comfortable, kick my feet up.
You can probably do that at the Syracuse Mets games anytime. You can 6 feet away because they don't never sell out. But in the Yankees and the Mets game, they're going to, I mean, basically he's allowing full capacity for sections with vaccinated. So I feel like you're going to see like a checkerboard in the stadiums where you're going to have full sections and then empty sections or sparsely dense sections. And then,
but if I was vaccinated and I went to a game and I'm sitting in my section, I looked over at the unvaccinated section and be like, I'm going to hang with these dudes. I'm not staying in this section anymore. This is crowded. I keep getting elbowed in the face. So I was like, no question, no second thought. I'm heading to the other section. But again, I'm a science denier and grandma killer. So that's because
I mean, it's I don't know if a cherry on top for this whole thing, this whole basically idea that we're going to create two tiers of classes of citizens, and that we're going to have these different set of rules, abiding by them is just cannot end well. And this is just the beginning of it, and hopefully this is the end of it as quickly as it happens.
I feel like at some level, maybe it's subconscious, maybe it's subliminal, like the people in government, the bureaucrats, the CDC, these people are like, when they have closed door meetings with that, they are looking at each other like, you think they're going to go with this? Let's see.
No, I think it's the exact opposite. I think they actually think that they're actually implementing good ideas and good plans. They're like, oh, these people are going to love this. Like, I think that, and then they're shocked when people like me or you are like, what are you talking about? You're segregating two different people, and like, oh, we didn't think of it that way. No shit, you didn't think of it that way because you actually implemented it.
Somebody like went around.
Because you actually segregated the people. We know you didn't think about it because you did it.
I always laugh whenever an idea like this comes out that has so many holes in it and so many things that are ridiculous and completely not based in science or fact, but just feel good. And I always wonder, like, the best example is when the Democrat caucus at the federal government put on like the African robes and then knelt down in the halls of Congress. And the question that I always go back to is like, all right, when you were in the meeting discussing this, what were the ideas that you said no to? What were the things you were like, nah, that's probably too far? Like, what didn't make the cut? I'm dying to know, as they were discussing stadium reopening, what was brought up but didn't make the cut? Like bubble suits, gloves, goggles.
There's a disconnect from reality that's unprecedented. It's literally mind-boggling every single day when they come out with these orders and rules and change. Like, some of the press conferences are just like, all right, what the hell is this dude going to say today?
They're all like that at this point of, why in the world am I still listening to you? You have what would it take for somebody to look at Andrew Cuomo in New York State and even the CDC and just say, you were wrong? Like, what would wrong look like? You're over here telling me masks work, lockdowns work, and I got to get vaccinated. Like, what would not working look like to you? Because this is what not working looks like. Like, we've had masks on for 14 months. And in that time, cases went up, then down, then up again, and then down again.
Right with the seasons.
Right. Like, people stopped wearing them, people started wearing them, people stopped wearing them, people started wearing them. Like, no, it's seasonal, and the mask, while it may have some potential benefit that is exceedingly limited,
we'll get into that in 1 minute,
was never intended in a cloth mask prior to this year. Nobody would have had the balls to claim that it was source control, because they would have been laughed out of the room, because there's decades of research on this saying, no, it's not. Yeah. Like, well, surgeons wear it to stop themselves from spreading viruses. No, they don't. They wear it to stop themselves from spitting on their patients and bacterial transmission, not viral. Yeah. And it goes into the size of the micron and how they behave, and all that's great. But Australia, I think I brought this up once before, so I apologize for repeating myself. Australia had a rule 2004 when SARS-CoV-1 swept across, where they threatened to prosecute any company that claimed that masks would protect them from SARS-CoV-1 or block the transmission. They say right on there, not intended to block SARS-CoV. They say it on the label. And yet we're all throwing masks on. Even the people that got the vaccine are like, I just don't want to look like, you. All right. Keep wearing a mask then. God love you.
All right. And so that brings us to the highlight of our show. We're going to end with our guest interview from Megan Mansell. She's a personal protective equipment expert. We break down basically all the science behind the masks. The one thing I found interesting where she talks about how, because I don't know if you know, the CDC also came out, we didn't cover this, but says that COVID is aerosol virus.
I heard that before. I think you and I discussed that a few weeks ago.
Maybe like April of 2020.
Oh, yeah, right. It was over a year ago that you and I were discussing that.
So the CDC has now come out and fully acknowledged that the transmission is airborne, and therefore transmits usually through aerosols. And so one thing that I found interesting with our interview with Mansell was she talks about how the masks basically, if you're 100% of the particles come out, that the droplets will be 10% of the virus. So like 90% is aerosols, 10% are droplets. And so the masks are catching maybe 10% of this virus at best, and then the droplets are basically being aerosolized through the mask and dissipating throughout into the. So basically, almost 100% of the virus is being spread anyway.
Because you have a mask on.
Yeah, the mask is doing nothing.
Again, the most interesting thing, in my opinion, that she brought up, and I had never thought about this, was, and she'll talk about this, I don't want to give anything away, but just pay attention during the interview. Masks, they're known to have inefficiencies as PPE from an airborne virus and from any viral spread. So there's very strict rules according to OSHA and other organizations and oversight entities that we have in America on what you're allowed to claim about PPE and what employers are allowed to mandate their employees wear. And they have to show efficacy. They have to demonstrate scientific efficacy of the PPE. You have to wear these gloves when you're dealing with these chemicals because these gloves are rated to stop chemical burns and reduce it by X amount of this or whatever else. But by claiming masks were source control instead of personal protective equipment, meaning my mask doesn't protect me, my mask protects you. Now it's not personal protective equipment and therefore is not subject to any efficacy requirements whatsoever. I found that to be really interesting because it didn't make sense, and then all of a sudden it magically did, like, oh my God, that's why you claim it. Because now you don't have to meet any standards, any rules, and even on children, there are no efficacy rules of children's masks because we've never put masks on kids before. Ever.
Yeah, and as Megan points out, that there's not even been testing for masks on kids. Like there's no evidence out of it.
Right. So you're making the assumption that it works and asking, well, prove that it doesn't. Well, obviously, proving a negative is way easier than proving a positive. So sure. How about it's been a year? We have schools with masks, schools without masks, schools with distancing, schools without distancing, and the overall spread at school is still less than 1%, regardless of measures. Makes no difference. Still within the margin of error for the study and taking all the most generous assumptions known to man, and there's still no difference in the spread. If anything, the teachers that are fully remote have a higher incidence of spread amongst teachers than the schools that are fully open. If that does not challenge your preconceived notions or at least your absolute belief in the efficacy of masks, I don't know what will.
Well, maybe when Megan talks about how you wear your mask into the bathroom.
I don't want to talk about that part.
All right, we'll let her talk about it. All right, so make sure you stay tuned for how your mask is not helping you in the bathroom. All right, so again, follow Meg Mansell on Twitter if you do the Twitter thing, Mamasaurus Meg. You can also read some of her articles she writes for rationalground.com, so you can read some of her mask breakdowns there. That site also has a bunch of different data-driven articles about COVID and such, and I find it a good source of information. So, Mr. Hussong, before we get into and finish the show with Meg Mansell, anything you'd like to leave the folks with?
No.
All right.
Just, if you're one of the unclean, I got you in solidarity, and I'm all for this new rule, because if I want to go to a game, do you have to have a negative COVID test to get in, or they just let me in untested?
You have to get if you're unvaccinated, you have to get a negative test. They're doing that right in the parking lot.
Ah, darn it.
You got to sign up, I think,
That's
a little
less
bit in advance.
Exciting.
Yeah.
All right.
So, all right. Well, with that, folks, again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in for another show here, live show on Monday.
Wait.
Yeah.
I have a negative COVID test and I still need to sit 6 feet away with a mask on?
Yeah.
Outside?
Yeah.
It's
you're
so much
unclean.
smarter now.
You're unclean.
It's so much smarter.
You're unclean.
I hate this place.
So, on that note, we'll leave it off with PPE Expert, Meg Mansell, and we will see you all again next Monday. Thank you for tuning in. I want to welcome to the show a former district education director over special populations integration. She serves students who are profoundly disabled, immunocompromised, undocumented, autistic, and behavioral challenged. She also has a background in hazardous environment, personal protective equipment application. She is experienced in writing and monitoring protocol implementation for immunocompromised public sector access under full ADA, OSHA, and IDEA compliance. Ladies and gentlemen, Megan Mansell, a.k.a. Mamasaurus Meg. I want to welcome to the show a former district education director over special populations integration. She serves students who are profoundly disabled, immunocompromised, undocumented, autistic, and behavioral challenged. She also has a background in hazardous environment, personal protective equipment application. She is experienced in writing and monitoring protocol implementation for immunocompromised public sector access under full ADA, OSHA, and IDEA compliance. Ladies and gentlemen, Megan Mansell, a.k.a. Mamasaurus Meg. Megan, thank you for joining Sports, Clicks, and Politics.
Thank you very much for having me today.
You're welcome. So I told a little bit of people in the intro kind of what you did, but do you want to kind of break that down more so in a more general sense of what you did?
It's two completely irrelevant backgrounds that just happen to be relevant right now. But what matters is we knew how to protect our vulnerable ahead of time. There was before everything COVID related, we had excellent measures for protecting our truly immunocompromised and profoundly disabled, as well as our workers under, protective standards based on particle size and particle behavior. And that's what this really is particle size, type, and behavior under pressure. And we're failing to look at these really, really tiny particles and see how they behave, in addition to looking at our respiratory system and talking about respiratory emissions, because it's a huge oversight that our CDC and our World Health Organization and our NIH, we're all just sitting around screaming droplet without looking at, respiratory emission rates are 90% in the radically behaving particulate range, which means 90% of what you exhale is under 0.3 microns and doesn't respond predictably to gravity. It's not droplet. It doesn't fall in that predictable 6-foot arc, and it has an 18 to 20-foot trajectory, which is greater the more pressure you put behind it. So if you are trying to tell somebody that wearing a mask is source control, you need to look very closely at the masks themselves and see how they can actually pressurize release into plumes, which furthers the trajectory of fine particulates. And those fine particulates remain aloft for hours, even days in some enclosed spaces. And when you're just trying to throw a Band-Aid over the whole thing and tell everybody, well, just wear this, expressly non-mitigating apparatus that we just hope is going to work, we have better physics applications. We have better fluid dynamics applications seeing, presented to everybody. And into those really simple parts like that, it's really easy to see both our flaws and what we should be doing differently. In event of future pathogen, we will pivot back to these exact same failed measures. And if we fail to address that, when looking at PPE for a given, you're trying to protect yourself against any given thing, it's minimum viable particle size under pressure. And so the minimum viable particle size for COVID is 0.06 microns. Multiple COVID virion particles can exist in a cluster and still fall in the radically behaving particulate range. So the people who say, well, it's got to be attached to something, it's not just a virion floating out there in space by itself, sure. But multiple can be bound, and this is a very low, minimal viral load pathogen for transmission. The minimum infective dose varies from person to person, but it's very low in comparison to other pathogen. And so when a very tiny amount of something can kill you, if you're that 0.4% of the population, it's a 99.6% survivability pathogen, but if you're that 0.4% of the population, that's 31,200,000 people on a global basis that we're basically just saying, well, hope you don't get it, and, just do your part, and we're all in this together, without saying like, hey, we take your life seriously. We value that you're a vulnerable individual, and we think that you should be getting the correct information to, evaluate your own personal risk and make plans accordingly. Because last I checked, you can get on a tiger and ride it through a flaming hoop off a cliff in California, buck naked, smoking a joint, as long as you're wearing a mask. And that's pretty stupid public policy.
So you were talking about the sizes of the particles themselves, but what are masks designed to stop? I think it says right on the box are the ones that I feel like at my work they said they don't even they're not designed to stop a respiratory illness. But so go back to the masks, compare them to, or what are they stopping of this? That you said the particle size of the virus was.
We'd have to open up a big umbrella here and first address that all masks are not created equal. The reason that surgeons wore surgical masks in surgical settings pre-COVID and since then was not for airborne pathogen mitigation. It was to stop splatter and spray of bodily fluids from getting in their oral and nasal mucosa in conjunction with eye protection. Cloth masks are expressly non-PPE, expressly non-mitigating for airborne pathogen. Were this solely a droplet-based pathogen, they still come with the concern of forced aerosolization of droplet through a membrane, which is the accumulated droplet particle with plosive pressure behind it, which is your exhaled respiratory pressure, pushing that droplet through a membrane, and the greater the pressure, the greater the release of that. So you have to break it down on a mask by mask basis. What I would like to completely throw out the window is masks as source control, and then get into minimum baseline PPE standards for the particulate range, while encouraging people, if you're truly vulnerable, don't go with the baseline minimum, go big or stay home. It's really that simple. You shouldn't try to hope your way through life being really unspecific when it's something that could kill you as an individual. And then, looking at, well, if we step aside from masks for a second and we look at environs control measures of dilution and destruction, you see a lot more people having success in mitigating airborne pathogen through using those techniques. And that can be, HVAC adjustments, opening windows, opening doors, just anything you can do to increase circulation of air in shared spaces. We also got into this whole mask break thing. And in an actual containment setting, if you took a mask break, you would be considered exposed. And so, they do it for comfort. But the whole reason you see people in the masks that they're in to begin with is based in comfort, not in the reality of actually doing something for pathogenic spread, which is what this is supposed to all be aimed at in the first place. And so, just you have health departments still handing out hand sanitizer for an airborne pathogen. You have people commingling identified vulnerable individuals with the general population because we've said, well, just wear a mask. And people seem to think that anything will do with a particulate this small. And the absolute baseline minimum for COVID-sized particulates is N95 or higher grade respirators plus eye protection. But even those have been shown to have less than 80% actual effectiveness. The 95 in N95 is for 95% of particulate blocked. But even Stephen Petty is able to show if you have a 3.2% leakage, then your efficacy is down to about 0. So what you have to look at is the fit of them, as well as whether or not they're being used in conjunction with eye protection. And like I said, those are the bare bones baseline minimum, not the gold standard that everybody seems to think they are. What I think that we had at the beginning was a supply chain issue, and N95 supply chain issue. And so people got this do-gooder thing where they're saying, well, maybe anything will be better than nothing. But we've not only shown that, cloth masks have 97% particle penetration, surgical 44% particle penetration. That's not helping you with a low viral load pathogen. And so instead of pivoting and saying you shouldn't be trying to use anything subgrade because it's expressly non-mitigating, you had people trying to keep workforces going with your essential workforce. And you'll find that those are the people who really got the whole cloth mask thing pushed on them so that you could keep the ball rolling, and they were told, well, no, it's not for protecting you, it's for protecting others to circumvent OSHA. So I think that's a real concern that needs to be addressed going forward.
And so I saw a conversation, I think it was on Twitter, between you and Kevin McKernan, and it led me to, and they were talking about how the you were worried about the masks, basically, I feel like aerosolizing the droplets, and basically they were, it led me to this question where I started asking people, and I'm going to ask it to you just because I'm looking for finally somebody that might be able to answer it. And so I asked that, is that droplet trapped in your mask permanently, or with each successive breath, is that droplet aerosolized, made smaller, and then expelled from your mask either back into the air or into your lungs?
So Zacharias Fogan gets really deeply into how the particulates on the inside of the mask can become unbound from droplet to be nebulized back into your lungs. So there are quite a few cycling concerns with, okay, your exhaling, your general respiration changes when you're wearing a mask from when you're not wearing a mask. Normally, you have you breathe mostly through your nose, and you don't breathe really all that deeply unless you're undergoing a strenuous activity. So the harder you're breathing through your mouth, the more you're pulling. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody and they have that mask pop into their mouth when they're inhaling, like they're sucking in? Well, you're sucking in and you're creating pressure from that membrane to pull in anything stuck to it or through it. There are also excellent breeding grounds for secondary pathogen in this moist, porous environment right in front of your mouth and nose. And people also wear them into bathrooms frequently, where they pick up flush matter from toilet plumes and lay them down on other surfaces and then put them right back on their face and breathe through them. So all of those things you can break through with respiratory pressure as well. And so you both have the pressurized release, where the more fitted a mask is around your mouth and nose, the greater the pressure behind the membrane of the particulate that you're pushing through. So I hope that answers that for you.
So, Megan, I think there's maybe a misconception, but it's a conception of the reason that masks work is because as you breathe out, the virus is attached to the droplets. The droplets go about 6 feet. So that's why we spread out. And if you breathe out, the droplets are then restricted in their movement. They can't get as far. And nobody's saying they're perfect, but at least they block something. Mm-hmm. You used a word with which I'm completely unfamiliar, and I'm hoping you can expand on that, because I think that answers the question. You said random particulate something.
Okay. I was talking about particulate ranges, and 90% of exhaled particulates are in the radically behaving particulate range. So radically behaving particulate range. Okay. So there's a threshold. When you get under 0.3 microns, you need to account for something called Brownian motion of fine particulates, which is this random bouncy behavior. It's no longer responding predictably to gravity under that threshold. And so that's 0.3 microns, and then COVID at the minimum particle size of 0.06 microns falls well under that range, and still fall under that range.
So it's 5 times smaller than the minimum threshold for the mask to basically be effective. And I'm using
that's not the threshold for masks to be effective. That's the particle range. Now most masks, most commercially available respirators filter exhale at 4 microns. So you can get 66 virion particles in a single cluster at, with each particle being exhaled. And when the minimum effective dose is assumed to be somewhere between 10 and 100 virions. In some places, some people say up to 1,000. What I think it really depends on more is individual health, because some people can have a higher exposure and still never contract the illness. I think what you need to realize is it firmly lays it out that they're not effective as source control. Sorry.
That's
go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say if you can go into this source control.
Okay.
So massive source control is what's been pushed in. I think I understood what you said, that the reason they said that is because otherwise they would have been bound by OSHA requirements to prove efficacy. But because it's source control and I'm not doing it to protect me, I'm doing it to protect you, it doesn't meet that definition. So can you just talk a little bit about that and about why it's not good for source control?
Okay, so and maybe other than telling you why it's not source control, maybe it would be easier if I showed you, because and this is an important thing when people are saying, okay, well, I'm going to start with a vented N95 respirator. And people are going to say, well, why would you talk about that? We know not to use vented N95 respirators. But this is the actual plume of an N95 respirator. And these are used, and I'll pull up another picture here in a second. These are regularly used at test sites. And so you have the people most likely in contact with novel pathogen breathing that pressurized plume I just showed you directly over your testing materials straight into your car window. There is also a plume with unvented N95s that comes out of the nose. Cloth and surgical masks, you can see if they're very fitted, it goes through in an outward plume. And if they're not very fitted, if they're loose, then it takes the path of least resistance right out the sides, right up the nose. And in the sclerotic imaging or the smoke, Emily, I'm trying to think of her last name. There's a really good video. Let me look her up really quick. There's a really good video series that Emily Burns did. Emily Burns on Twitter did all of these different masks, and so she would show the exhale emitted particulate range for cigarette smoke and then exhale through them. So you could see all of the different masks with different respirators. You could clearly see all of the exhale positions on them and show that, this is not effective source control. And back to that particle size and particle range, 90% of particles are in that under 0.3 micron range. So really what you're saying is we're trying to just mitigate 10% of your exhaled particulates, which if we do this wrong can then become the other 90%. So does that make sense? You have 90% of exhaled particulates that cloth and surgical masks do nothing for. Cloth and surgical masks are expressly non-mitigating for this pathogen range anyway. But the droplet that everybody's been so concerned about only makes up for about 10% of exhaled respiratory emissions to begin with, and can become the aerosolized one due to the force of pressure and aerosolization through a membrane.
Because my cloth mask, as it turns out, is not a force field that immediately kills the virus and it gets there.
It's not magical.
Really disappointing.
People really want you to think that they possess these magical powers with this old material that was laying around that your granny knitted up, or sewed up or whatever. But they're never sterile, and you'll hear people say, "Well, I wash them frequently." Well, okay, you can wash them all day long, but they never were helpful with this pathogen range to begin with. So why are you so attached to it?
And can we go further with the masks and just go to a specific vector is the kids, right? So like we have these mask mandates in New York. Ben has kids in the system here. I don't know, maybe Ben would like to expound on this a little bit, but you start with masks on children, and we'll let Ben have a follow-up after that if you'd like to, Meg.
Okay, so I think for starters, there's nothing else out there where you could say, hey, I'm going to require a child to put this in front of their mouth and nose for 8 to 12 hours a day. But here's the kicker. It's completely untested. It's completely unregulated. We have no efficacy standards for any child-sized masks. They have, children are, I have 3 lovely children, but they're disgusting in the things that they'll do, throughout the day when you're closely watching them. And if you have a class of 26 children that you're responsible for keeping on top of all day in an expressly non-mitigating apparatus for which there are no regulatory standards or testing history, I just want you to show me anything else that we have required this kind of imposing measure on children in the past. Because if you were to set it up as an ethics review and say, okay, we're going to put you in this apparatus for 8 to 12 hours a day. It's not tested. It's not regulated. No two are going to be alike. They don't actually mitigate what we're trying to mitigate. However, they do cause deoxygenation and hypercapnia. Your child will be inhaling microbial pathogenic growth on the mask, as well as the fibers of the mask themselves. Also, we're going to remove your medical consent and medical clearance from the conversation, because, workplace respirator use requires medical consent and medical clearance, but we're not going to do that this time. Of course, that wouldn't pass an ethics review because it's ridiculous, and it's ridiculous to try to put these things on children when children are the least likely to even be affected by this. The case infection rate for children is very low, and children, I'm really tired of hearing how resilient children are. Children are not resilient. Children have developmental milestones that, if unmet, can take years to remediate if capable of doing so at all. You have to be able to see tooth, tongue, and lip placement for linguistic onset and development, and the full face for social cue development that you learn from your caregivers as a baby. This will definitely see people presenting children who they think are showing signs of autism spectrum disorder, who have just missed these language and social development milestones. But so much of autism spectrum diagnoses rely on parent reporting and observation, and they will present exactly the same as a genuine ASD diagnosis. So I think that there are just some really big concerns when it comes to what we're trying to push on children, and this sets a terrible precedent for anything experimental on our youth to come. Just the whole consent and there is a laundry list of qualifying exemptions for the public sector under ADA, and that people are having to fight tooth and nail just to breathe freely from a completely non-mitigating, untested, unregulated apparatus blows my mind.
Yeah, I agree with you on my children are all wonderful, and they're all disgusting little petri dishes of germs that are roaming around. And they wear a mask every day, and they don't really complain. And I basically have said to them, look, you got to wear it. Take it off as soon as you can. Take it off whenever you can. These are the rules right now. But I watch my son. I know how gross he is. He's 8, like all 8-year-olds. He's gross. He touches everything. He's into everything. And then he grabs his mask. He drops his mask. He steps on his mask, picks it up, puts it on his face. You said there's no standard. So I guess I want to clarify that a little bit. At least on the mask that I have to wear, it has to meet certain standards of, I don't know the proper wording here, but blockage from things coming in for it to be deemed a medical mask. Do I have that right?
Well, for it to be considered mitigating for a given pathogen or particulate range, it would have to meet different standards under OSHA. OSHA and NIOSH standards are what most people would rely on here within the U.S. Now, surgical masks are only for barrier protection against splatter and spray. They're solely droplets, expressly non-mitigating for airborne. So even medical masks are not considered mitigating under these circumstances. And so when I'm talking about regulation, every single mask that you see on a child's face has not passed any kind of regulatory standards for being safe for use or effective for use. And that's why I'm talking about efficacy percentages, because I can say, one of the things that I pivot to often is our mitigation during the AIDS crisis. Had we said, just saran wrap or any old thing will do, just knit something up, we basically find ourselves in the same position we have now, because what is deadly to a given person if exposed we need to be giving them really specific information so they can make the proper decisions. So during the AIDS crisis, when they came out and said, okay, latex only with 98% efficacy, don't use with oils because that degrades the membrane and can decrease efficacy, that was important information for people to get. It was also important for them to say, leave lambskin out of the conversation because those are too porous. They do block sperm, but don't block HIV. This is a really important public mitigation measure where we had to be incredibly specific with PPE, with prophylaxis, in order to get to a place where we were saving lives in a meaningful capacity with the use of this apparatus. And we've never gotten anywhere close to publicly addressing those standards with COVID, because I believe it has more to do with the supply chain issue. And the supply chain issue also created a caste system where, in hospitals and in workplaces, the real good PPE was given to the people deemed irreplaceable. And it was as though when you went down a rung, though these are all human beings and all lives that are worthy and meaningful, only the people deemed irreplaceable got the good stuff, and the other people had to either make something or use surgical masks, which are OSHA workplace violations that I just don't think people knew to blow the whistle on, quite frankly. And OSHA reporting has to come from the employee being forced to wear the non-mitigating apparatus to begin with. And so you can't go into a place and say, I see 20 people wearing a non-mitigating apparatus here, I want to make a complaint. It has to come directly from the employee, and they can do that anonymously, but most people don't even know that that's a thing or why. They don't understand specifically where their rights in the public sector for workplaces are being violated.
That makes sense. So I want to confirm or clarify something that you said earlier, and then I got one more question, and
sure.
then we can wrap up. You said you're talking about N95 is named that because it's supposed to block 95% of the particulates. I might be misusing that word. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
And then you said that anything that blocks less than 97%, I think it was 3 and change percent that can get through, makes the efficacy drop to practically zero.
No. I was saying that cloth masks have 97% particle penetration. That means they only hold out 3%. In some tests that have been done, they've been shown to let through 97% of particulates, which should say that this is not helping here. And so the other part to the N95, I was just saying why there's a 95 on N95. And and actually the particle range of COVID isn't included in the N95 of the particulate range that they block. But because they are a non-woven mask, and instead they're kind of like if you took a bunch of glue between your hands and stretched your hands apart, there's all of these kind of little places that things can get lodged in them. And so that's what they're trying to express with N95s, is that they're of the PPE range that is the baseline minimum that can trap particulates that are in that Brownian motion that need to be accounted for, if that makes sense. And then there's far higher grades as well. There's P100 masks, and then there's also face piece respirators or fully integrated units. It doesn't stop at masks. The respirators, and what kind of, if you're trying to block a pathogen, or if you're trying to block a particulate or a noxious vapor, these all have different standards for workplace use. And so knowing that there are, this is not a one-size-fits-all field by any means. And so just failing to be really specific with particulate behavior in relation to what you're trying to mitigate has gotten us to a really unfortunate place. So.
Yeah, hard to argue that point. So I guess here's my last question I have for you is, who should be wearing a mask? What type of mask? And when/where should they be wearing? When would a mask be effective in this particular battle? And that doesn't mean 100% effective by any means.
Sure.
I just mean, I hear a lot like, well, if it saves one life, it's so little, it could help a little. When does it actually help?
It only helps if you're the person who has it on your face and you're wearing the correct particulate range, the correct PPE for particulate range. And like I was saying, I would personally, if I were personally concerned, you wouldn't find me kitted out in anything under, P100 pocket face piece respirator with eye protection in very distanced, open spaces during non-peak hours had I any reason to go into public. What I think we should be addressing is people identifying whether or not they are personally vulnerable and talking about other methods that are far more effective, like osmotic immigration, which is using testing or strategic quarantine to access vulnerable populations or individuals, where you're either quarantining in absolute for 8 to 14 days, which is the current CDC guideline for onset of this given pathogen, or using testing to access those populations for short periods of time. For new intake of a vulnerable individual within a given population, they would need to go undergo absolute quarantine, because you would not know. A test can indicate that viral load is not high enough for just a daily interaction for a short period of time. But if you have an intake of a new person into a population, you don't know if they're still in dormant stages before actual onset of having enough of a systemic viral load to flag positive. And so if you're truly a vulnerable individual, if you truly consider yourself part of that 0.4% of the population unable to, survive this, I'd first ask you, do you want added protection? Because I think consent is part of the conversation, even if you are a vulnerable individual. And if you are, then I would, for school systems, try to push you toward tiered protected groupings where you're not commingling with the general population. It could easily be staffed in under hospital homebound designations to create tiered protected groupings where there's a specific behavioral protocol and a specific interaction protocol that would be very limited, and you could use testing strategically before meeting in person with those groups. But for actually wearing PPE, if you're a vulnerable person who can't survive this, there are probably other respiratory pathogens that are equally dangerous to you. And you would have to look at the health of the individual. Are they vulnerable because they're already having breathing difficulties? Well, if putting a restrictive device on you lowers your oxygen intake and increases your CO2 exposure, we might be making you worse off by putting you in an apparatus than your health was to begin with. And so it's hard for me to pivot and say, go to this mask if you're vulnerable, because even if you're truly vulnerable, there are many better options than masks for personal protection. And a lot of it has to do with behavior. A lot of it has to do with failing to commingle with mixed populations, especially during peak hours. Here you have people who have isolated for 8-9 months who are saying, well, I can go back in public now because I have this magic mask on my face, and those people are being exposed to things that can kill them during these current practices, and I think we need to get away from that, and just bring individual liberty back into the conversation, where you should be able to make decisions for your children. You should be able to wake up tomorrow and say, I'm not sending my child in this complete fabrication of helpfulness, and in thinking of the trauma long term, that we have a year that this has been going on for this point. You can tell me that something might not have been hurtful long term if it ever had been 14 days, but I don't even think that 14 days ever began. And so now we're in at this point we have actual developmental delays to be concerned about. We have actual linguistic issues to be concerned about, as well as the health challenges of, I don't know how many people I've had message me and say, my children are now experiencing terrible headaches from having to wear these, or facial acne, or dental problems. And it's because these are untested and unregulated and never intended for long-term wear. And for people in workplaces who have to wear PPE for an extended period of time, the oxygen saturation becomes of great concern. You end up in PPE with an independent airline coming in if you're going to be engaged in strenuous activity. And so these schools mandating children wear masks or double masks to run, these are incredibly dangerous practices that we've got to put an end to.
Megan, I want to thank you again for your time. Before I let you go, I want to make sure that there's nothing that we didn't miss or didn't we cover enough, something else you want to fill in the folks with before we let you go?
I just think that you should spend some time looking at the data of what, that mask mandating districts versus non-mandating districts, in addition to just what the data is actually saying in these applications across the U.S. Rational Ground is a website that I write for, and they are excellent at keeping on top of data on a daily basis. And there are data dashboards on their website I would really recommend looking into on there. And I've written a reopening guide both for the public sector and for schools in general, and have a ton of resources available on my Twitter page, which is at MamasaurusMeg, MAMASAURUS Meg, MEG. And I try to get back with everybody. I'm a zero inbox kind of girl, but there a lot of people out there have questions, and you should, because if something just strikes you as, well, this doesn't all add up. We've been trying this for a really long time, and they keep saying that things are getting worse. Maybe it's time to start asking questions and push back, even if you're the only one. I was at a school board meeting in Tallahassee last week. I was the only person who showed up to that meeting, and there were 14 people viewing it online at that time. And I'm now up to over 575,000 views online. So just because you're local people who are acting, all woke and don't care to show up and show out for kids, doesn't mean that there aren't people out there who don't completely agree with you that this is a civil liberties issue, alongside a true misapplication of particle physics in regards to PPE and the public sector integration laws that are meant to protect us and from such tomfoolery. So
well, I appreciate all the information, all the time that you've given. If you're going to be the only one showing up at a town board meeting, I think that the town board meeting is still on the negative side of that outcome. So I appreciate your work. Follow Meg at Rational Ground. She's got work there. And again, follow her on Twitter, MamasaurusMeg. Megan Mansell, thank you again for your time.